5 of the fantasy football season. Here's the top 12 quarterbacks I'm ranking this week. The first guy, Josh Allen of the Buffalo Bills. Josh Allen, another monster season it's been for him this season, and he's put up fantasy numbers each and every week. Is Josh Allen this year at least 25 or more fantasy points in every game. In week 5 here, he's got a good matchup versus the Pittsburgh Steelers, who defense looked great in week 1, but besides that, a lot of teams have been passing on him. I know Isaiah McKenzie got hurt in the last game, and Jamison Crowder broke his ankle, but he still has good weapons with Stephon Diggs. Gabriel Davis has to get in the mix over there for this Buffalo Bill team. But Josh Allen, each and every week, he's at top of the ranking boards. Either 1 or 2, it don't really make a difference, because this week he's going to have a monster ball game once again versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I wouldn't be surprised if he goes anywhere from 35 to 40 fantasy points this week. The next guy is Patrick Mahomes of the Kansas City Chiefs. So Patrick Mahomes, another great season for him, no doubt about it. I know he had 2 mediocre ball games in week 2 or 3 with 21 and 20 fantasy points, but week 4 Tampa Bay, 30 fantasy points, 249 pass yards, 3 touchdowns, an interception, and 34 rush yards. So week 5 here, great matchup versus the Vegas Raiders, and division foe in the AFC West that gives up the 6th most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. They're not going to stop Patrick Mahomes. I think they'll score at least 30 to 40 points is this Kansas City Chief team. And him and Travis Kelce have a great rapport, and they're starting to mix the rookies in as well, and Clyde Edwards-Hilaire's doing a great job for this Kansas City Chief team. So this week here with a division matchup, a team that he's carved up throughout his career, here's Patrick Mahomes. He's definitely a quarterback that I have. He's a quarterback that I got number 2 this week. Number 3, Lamar Jackson of the Baltimore Ravens. So Lamar, he actually had an off game in week 4 in terms of fantasy football, where he only scored 17 fantasy points, 144 pass yards, touchdown, 11 rush attempts, 73 rush yards versus the best defense in the NFL here in the Buffalo Bills. So week 5 here, he's got a beatable matchup versus Cincinnati Bengals. And this Bengal team, I know, gives up the 3rd least amount of fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season, but I don't think that really counts as much. They versed Teddy Bridgewater this season for most of that game last week. They versed Joe Flacco in week 3, so a lot of easy matchups it's been for the Cincinnati Bengal team. But Lamar Jackson, we know he's an elite athlete. You know you're going to get at least anywhere from 7 to 10 fantasy points weekly from him on the ground. And after a tough ball game for him in week 4 versus Buffalo, I think he bounces back in another home game here for Baltimore and has a big fantasy day. So I got him in number 3 at the quarterback position this week. Number 4, Tom Brady of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Tom Brady, he got off to a slow start the first few weeks, and that was missing key pieces. Chris Godwin's been banged up with the hamstring. Evans, he was suspended a game and missed that ball game in week 3 versus Green Bay. But Brady in week 4, I know they lost the ball game 41-31 versus the Kansas City Chiefs. But hey, he had his best fantasy day, 385 pass yards, 3 touchdowns, a fumble loss in week 5 versus the Falcons, a team that really don't stop anybody. They give up the 10th most fantasy points to quarterbacks in fantasy football. So right here, as long as Mike Evans healthy and Godwin's good to go, I think Brady has a field day. And they even got Rachaad White into the mix of things, catching some passes out of the backfield in for Leonard Fournette a little bit. So if they could add him to the offense as a little weapon as well to go with Fournette, that's another dimension for this Tampa Bay offense. So Tom Brady, after coming off a tough loss, I expect him to put in a big ball game. And I got him number 4 this week. Number 5, Jalen Hurts of the Philadelphia Eagles. So Hurts has a good matchup at the Arizona Cardinals that give up the 8th most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. So Hurts, he's been off to a great start this season. Week 4 was a fluky game. It was wet. The ball was slick. Horrible conditions. Only 204 pass yards and interception. 38 rush yards and a touchdown. But right here, week 5 in a dome in Arizona, I think he has a big ball game is Jalen Hurts. And I could see this definitely be a shootout between the Eagles and the Arizona Cardinals. So Jalen Hurts right now, one of the better players in fantasy football at the quarterback position, which has been a very weak position for the most part, besides the top 6-7 guys. A lot of inconsistent ball games. And I even mentioned it earlier, like Lamar had 17 this week, Hurts 16 in week 4, and Lamar 17 in week 4. Tom Brady's had a few bad games, and Mahomes has had mediocre games with 20 fantasy points. So this season, it's tougher to find solid quarterback play. But Jalen Hurts this week, number 5 at Arizona. Number 6, Justin Herbert of the Los Angeles Chargers. So Justin Herbert, we know he's still not 100% with the rib issue here, but he had a bounce back game in week 4 at the Texans. 340 pass yards, 2 touchdowns in that one. So week 5, he's got a tough matchup a little bit on paper at Cleveland. They got Jadeveon Clowney. I know he was banged up, but he should be back in this game. And Garrett, he's most likely out. But anyway, without Keenan Allen, his numbers have gone down a little bit, is Justin Herbert. Gerald Everett, he's stepped up and he's playing great football, though, in his place at the tight end position, getting more targets. Jordan Palmer, he had an off-ball game in last week's game versus Houston. He was a decent sub-in, but if Keenan Allen comes back, it's sky's the limit once again here for Justin Herbert. So this week here, I got him at number 6, number 7, Joe Burrow of the Cincinnati Bengals. So Burrow I had as a recommended start this week here, and it was close between 6 or 7 with him and Herbert, but obviously Herbert's been a little more consistent so far this season, so I kept him in number 6. But Burrow this week at Baltimore, a division matchup, no doubt about it. It's going to be a shootout, I believe, between these two teams here. And Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase really hasn't had the greatest of games so far. It's been more T. Higgins more than anything doing the damage at the wide receiver position for this Bengal team. To have 2 great receivers like Higgins and Jamar Chase is definitely a plus for Joe Burrow here. And this week here, Baltimore gives up the second most fantasy points to quarterbacks. And I think Burrow has a good game, and I got him in number 7. Number 8, Aaron Rodgers of the Green Bay Packers. So Rodgers, he's starting to get things going a little bit. I know 20 fantasy points isn't the greatest of things for quarterbacks, but 3 weeks in a row now, he's reached that plateau, is Aaron Rodgers. And week 5 here, good matchup versus the New York Giants. And to be honest here, this Giant team, they really haven't played many good quarterbacks. They played Ryan Tannehill in week 1. Week 2, Baker Mayfield. Week 3, Cooper Rush played pretty decent football and they lost that game. And then week 4, Justin Fields. So right here will be the toughest test to date for this Giant defense. And I think Aaron Rodgers, he's going to have a good game. Him and Romeo Doubs are getting that connection going. He's the number 1 right now, looks like, over there in Green Bay. Him and Robert Tonyan, they playing decent football, pitch and catch in the end zone and red zone targets. And this week here, I think the Packers, they come out, they're ready to go. They've won 3 in a row as this Packer team, but they really haven't had that dominant offensive performance. And I think this week in London, they put on a show for the fans over there. And Aaron Rodgers has his best fantasy game of the season. I got him at number 8, number 9, Kyler Murray of the Arizona Cardinals. In fantasy football, he's playing good football as Kyler Murray. If he's been mediocre, if you ask me, but fantasy, he's putting up the numbers, and that's all that counts at the end of the day. He's got 3 fantasy games with 24 or more fantasy points this season. Week 4 at Carolina, it was a grinded out type of game, 207 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, and into 26 rush yards and a rushing touchdown. So Murray, he hasn't rushed the football a lot like we've seen in previous seasons. This year, he's still under 100 yards rushing the football. He's trying to be more of a pocket passer, and he's trying to throw a lot of balls on the run and out of the pocket than just take off and run his Murray. This week, I know he's got a tough matchup versus Philadelphia, but he always finds a way to have top 10 numbers pretty much weekly, is Kyler Murray. So even with a tough defense and a couple playmakers still out on this team here, with A.J. Green, he's day-to-day still, and Hopkins suspended a couple more games here, I still got Kyler Murray as a good option, and I got him in number 9 this week. Number 10, Jared Goff of the Detroit Lions. So what a season it's been for Jared Goff so far in fantasy football. This week here, I know he's got not the greatest of matchups in terms of scheme and stuff going to Foxborough in New England, but the Patriots, believe it or not, do give up the 7th most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. So right now, Jared Goff, he's been playing lights out football, no doubt about it. 1 mediocre game in week 3 with only 17 fantasy points. But besides that, it's been 20 or more fantasy points each and every week here for Goff. So right now, if he gets Amon St. Brown back, that's a plus. We saw TJ Hawkinson have a monster game, 179 yards and 2 touchdowns. So right here, Goff, every week he's pretty much going to be in that top 12 until he struggles. But right now in New England, I'm not expecting a monster game out of him, but I think 18-20 fantasy points is definitely a game Jared Goff could have, and I got him at number 10. Number 11, Kirk Cousins of the Minnesota Vikings. So Kirk Cousins last week in a plus matchup we thought he would have a pretty good game at the New Orleans Saints, but that hasn't been the case. And Cousins this season has had 2 pretty solid games and 2 mediocre games. Week 1 versus Green Bay, 23 fantasy points. Week 2 with Philly, 13. Week 3 versus Detroit, 22. And then Week 4 at New Orleans, only 15 fantasy points. So right here, Week 5, a good matchup versus the Bears. This is an indoor game. They don't got to worry about the weather. And Kirk Cousins, he's way better at home than he is on the road throughout his Minnesota Viking career. So right here, Adam Thielen, he's been getting in the mix, making some plays at the wide receiver position. Justin Jefferson, we know he's a stud and one of the best receivers, if not the best receiver in the league. He had a great bounce-back game in London. And right here, I think versus the Bears, this team's 3-1. They're going to keep rolling. And I could see Kirk Cousins this week having another 20-plus fantasy point type of day. And the 12th and final quarterback I got ranked this week's Trevor Lawrence of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Trevor Lawrence last week was the worst game of the season for him. And it was the wet conditions in Week 4, not handling the football, not playing good football. He finished 174 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, and into 7 rush yards and 4 fumble losses. So obviously the 4 fumble losses from the wet weather in the slick ball. That's a fluke, no doubt about it. And right now, hopefully in Week 5, he gets back versus the Houston Texans in sunny Jacksonville, and all those hurricanes and the rains are gone. So right here, pretty good matchup versus Houston. They're not really going to stop anyone in this league. And Zay Jones should return as well. The reason they held them out, I believe, versus Philly, because that hamstring was a little tight and the weather conditions. So right now, Zay Jones should be back for this Jacksonville Jaguar team. And I'm throwing out last week's ball game because of the weather conditions. I got Lawrence at 12, so that's the top 12 of quarterbacks I'm ranking here for Week 5 of the fantasy football season.